The Book of Boba Fett always seemed incredibly unnecessary to me, from the moment it was revealed at the end of The Mandalorian Season 2. I had some issues with Mando, but of all the characters brought back, I think Boba's inclusion was one of the two that just made sense for the show, the other being Bo-Katan. Now, the Boba show really has it all. Dull, uneventful episodes, unnecessary cameos, and set up for plot lines irrelevant to the series. But it didn't need to be any of that. The Book of Boba Fett almost proved its existence to me. The Tusken Raider stuff is great. The idea of Boba taking over crime on Tatooine and turning it on its head is interesting. And I would have been mostly satisfied with it, until the last couple of episodes turned the show into literally everything and nothing at the same time. So, what went wrong? Well, being negative seems to be my shtick, but I think a lot of the issues boil down to how the show handles its protagonist. Boba has always had a weird relationship with the Star Wars fandom, gaining popularity purely because of being the tertiary badass of The Empire Strikes Back. He gained such a high reputation as this awesome character. Granted, Legends does expand on this somewhat, and I use somewhat lightly, but ultimately, he's just a cool guy with a gun. Nothing wrong with that. The show was the perfect place to grow him into a more complicated person, because, let's face it, Mando didn't particularly do anything interesting with him. Not that it needed to. Let's see how he fared in his own show, shall we? There's some interesting stuff going on with Boba'S upbringing. Born and bred as a clone of his father, then spending the war his dad helped start trying to live up to his bounty hunter ways, after seeing his head cut off right in front of him. Brutal. How much does the show resort to exploring this though? A big issue with the show is we don't understand where Boba's coming from. The show keeps shoving the line about respect down your throat, but we have no idea why he had this change, and don't know enough to see how much of a change it actually is. Attack of the Clones establishes his origins, and the Clone Wars gives enough context to his attempt as rising through the ranks. Kind of a shame we never got that arc with him and Cad, but we'll get to that later. The Book of Boba Fett needed to have Boba reflecting on his past decisions, and giving us an indication of how much his past has affected him. Short glimpses into stuff we've already seen doesn't really tell us anything. Why not have him have a conversation with Fennec about the significance of his armor, and why he journeyed across the galaxy to get it back? Yes, it is his father's, but did he love his father? Who knows? Hell, maybe have his own perception of the armor and his father change throughout the show, and have him acknowledge his father's shortcomings, if he had any. This leads me to the Tuskens, who honestly provide the only real heart there is in the series. Boba being humbled and gaining mutual respect with the natives of Tatooine is very interesting, and as well as picking up new skills, it directly ties into his feelings for Tatooine. But this isn't enough. We don't know how long his time with them was, and was that really all it took for him to fall in love with the planet? If it was, sure. But Boba is so vacant that you cannot tell if he's doing this for himself, for them, for the people of Tatooine, or all of them. The dialogue he has is so stilted, and it's clear that that's not because it's who he is. I feel like you can tell the Tuskens aren't his sole reason for doing this is because once the flashback's over, they're just gone from the story. Not even one of them shows up later. So, Boba doesn't have that initial grasp to help us understand it. That's fine. Maybe his actions in the show give us a reason to grow to love him. Yeah, no. Something at least everyone seems to notice is that Boba is an extremely passive character, and just reacts to everything thrown at him. If he wasn't the protagonist, he'd be dead. Crime lords don't survive by sitting on their ass, especially when Boba isn't even doing crime, and is the lord of an empty palace. Again, I have to commend the Tusken Raider flashbacks for carrying all of this, as Boba does take some action, and it's one of the few sections of the show where he feels like an individual. From trying to escape, to saving them, to teaching them how to fight the technologically superior people, and then to have them all die. This is good shit.
Oh, stop. Oh, stop. Oh, stop. Oh, stop.
And we needed more of it, but in the present, where the important stuff happens. But Crime Lord Boba? Let's have a look at his list of endeavours. First, he demands respect with nothing to back it up, gets attacked before getting his ass handed to him and getting his right hand to bring in a hostage. His second chances he gives everyone is a good start, but when that's all he spends the show doing, it feels empty, shallow, and frankly,
insubordinate and churlish.
Boba gets given everything else. He gets a Rancor, has to take no effort to bring people to his cause, has to get saved time and time again. So much so that we have to spend 2 episodes with an unrelated character who then ends up getting the ball rolling for him. One of the best parts of a story about someone becoming a leader is the tough decisions they have to make. Boba is never faced with a conundrum that requires deep thought, where no answer is a good one. There's no moment where Boba is in over his head, no moment that proves why he is the person who deserves to sit on this throne. He's only ever faced with obstacles that force him to either kill someone or spare them. After 5 times, it's just not interesting. Now we get to the end. The Pikes have turned Tatooine into a battleground. Boba has attempted, and failed, to get enough manpower and external allegiances, which is deserved because he keeps making empty promises and soft threats. Once he realises he's on his own, he just holds his ground. I get the whole notion of him not abandoning his people, but because that relationship isn't fleshed out as it is, it kind of just makes the finale dull. Good characters are allowed to react to things, but when doing so, they need to take counteractions themselves, rather than just let the plot pull them along. What makes good characters great characters, decision-wise, is when they can then, on top of that, make their own choices in anticipation of everything that is happening in the story. Boba just doesn't do any of that, and the ones he does make don't exactly paint him to be intelligent, which I'm sure isn't the point. What is this show actually about? I'm not asking about plot here, we've gone over that. But what is it that the show is trying to tell me? Being a criminal is good? Being a criminal is bad? Being a crime lord is dope AF? There's even the line Boba has at the end where he asks if he's even the right person for this. Well, I don't know. Are you? The show didn't bother to tell me, so I kind of want to know if the 6 hours I spent here were worthwhile or not. You can't just ask me a question and expect me to fill in the entire story. So, Boba's whole shtick is to rule out of respect. Why? I've mentioned how the flashbacks do a bad job of making us care and sympathise with Boba, and the ultimate downfall of that is its effect on the theme. I honestly could not tell what the show wants me to take away from it, other than that it wants to remind me that I'd prefer to just go and watch The Mandalorian. The beginning of a story is supposed to set up the central question, so in this instance it's a question like, can respect win out over fear in the criminal world? An interesting starting point to ponder, and to give the show credit, technically the show does explore that. Aside from the 2-hour Mando hijinks, the Book of Boba Fett does work towards answering that, but because of its shortcomings in storytelling, it doesn't successfully convey its message. The thesis statement of the show is that respect does win out, but the plot so convolutedly reaches that point that it makes you do a double take. The final episode wants to make us see the impact Boba has made, but because the journey was so easy for him and everything just fell into his lap, it feels like the writers are forcing a theme into the show that was never present. The show suffers from a similar ailment to all of the MCU Disney Plus shows, in that they're so concerned about the future that they only bother to place the turning points without the development that leads to them. You know the classic phrase, "It's the journey, not the destination"? Well, that should be something every story keeps in mind. An impactful ending only works if it spends the time crafting the pieces that create it. These shows rush through the development to show you cool action scenes, fun cameos, and setups for future installments, which makes a lot of them not very rewatchable, because you have already felt the short-lived emotion of shock and awe. The reveal of Cad Bane returning doesn't have the same weight as the first time, because the only reason it works is that you didn't know it was coming. Which is insane, because a lot of these pieces would work here had more craft been shown. Cad Bane and Cobb Vanth could have served the show immensely better had they been brought in a few episodes earlier. Bane could have been a central antagonist that forces Boba to reflect on his past as a bounty hunter, and Bane is a perfect stand-in for the antithesis of the whole show. Cobb Vanth shows us an example of what Boba is trying to do, but on a much smaller scale, so if we had spent time with him, Bane taking him out would have really upped the stakes. The Mandalorian would have been cooler if we cut out the plot from his show and just had him as the badass Boba calls in when all hope is lost. Because of the way he's included, we forget about what is actually important in the show. It certainly doesn't help that most of the Mando stuff is better than the Boba stuff, even if it does make the end of The Mandalorian Season 2 feel cheap. The new characters introduced in this show also have a severe lack of screen time, that by the time that Cantina place is bombed, I only just remembered that those characters existed. Not all characters in a show need to provide an angle on the central argument, but when none of them do, what's the point? The finale is completely undeserved, and it feels like the show only does the bare minimum to introduce concepts so it can smush them together in the finale like a kid with an Action Man figure. Boba and Bane's final showdown could have been one of the coolest standoffs in Star Wars, as the two finally get to see which one is right. Unfortunately, all we get is some colourful fluff that leaves you wanting. It has become very apparent to me that Disney is going through a Marvelification process with Star Wars. Now, whatever the takeaway you have from that is, it brings up a lot of questions around the longevity of this franchise. Star Wars has limitless potential, but the series doesn't seem to want to utilise that, at least since the reins have been handed over. There is nothing wrong with telling stories that interconnect, but it comes to a point where the connected tissue begins to drag the original material down a sarlacc pit. I'm beginning to have the same issues with Star Wars that I've had with almost everything Marvel recently. I always finish it with the thought that I would have enjoyed it so much more if it had been standalone. The first season of The Mandalorian stands apart, for obvious reasons, I think. It done this. I have my issues with the overall structure and plot, but I commend the show for not relying on anything else to get people to watch it, other than its own essence. Admittedly, they went a tad overboard with Baby Yoda, but damn if it wasn't a great marketing idea. The show was incredibly accessible, and proves that Star Wars doesn't need Jedi and the Force to stand on its own 2 feet. The first season anyway. But now we've gone backwards. Now that Mando has been successful, we apparently need to grow out this web of character crossovers that always takes away from who we are supposed to be following. The Book of Boba Fett had everything it needed to be its own great show that slotted neatly in this universe. But they just couldn't help themselves. Breaking down what it means to be a bounty hunter, exploring Boba's past and actually giving him depth, the intricacies of a crime gangster story set on one of the most recognisable Star Wars locations, actually having some reasons to bring back certain characters. But it kind of just doesn't do any of that, and proceeds to tell the most generic story possible while undoing the work of The Mandalorian to set up its next season. Nothing in the show gets developed. Kenobi is the next show on the horizon, and again, while I think the show is incredibly unnecessary, I think it has the potential to be an incredible slow burn drama. That's what I believe Kenobi needs to be. I might be jinxing it now, but this show is more than close to being released, so whatever it is, we can only wait to find out.
like a panther, 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 like a panther. Find other panthers, make baby panthers. You're free to roam the dune sea. Go!